Inflation, unemployment, rising prices, and taxes. The economy is not in great shape, which is why it's so important to talk about the basics of how our markets function and what the federal government needs to do to get out of the way. That's where sound money comes in. Joining me today is Representative Warren Davidson. Congressman, thanks for being with us here today.
Definitely an honor, and thanks for paying attention to this topic.
No, it's so important, and I think most Americans, it's something they're not paying attention to their own peril. But why don't you explain a little bit about a strong dollar and sound money policy?
Yeah, so when you think about sound money and federal policy, a lot of what's going on right now is really too much government, too little freedom and too much government. So what does that mean? Well, go back when George H.W. Bush was president, and he said, read my lips, no new taxes. At that point in time, he felt obligated to pay for the spending, so he broke his promise and raised taxes. Then, in the early 2000s, Dick Cheney said Reagan proved deficits don't matter. Well, of course he didn't prove that. He did prove you could take out a loan, but they never got around to the part where you have to repay it. So the deficits continued to balloon, and then you get to like 08, 09, and then it was quantitative easing, which is there's not even a lender. The Fed just dumps it on their balance sheet. They're the lender of last resort. And since then, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet has grown by $8 trillion. So if you think about that, $29 trillion of debt, $8 trillion is owned by the Federal Reserve. That means not only is there not enough tax revenue to pay for it, not only is there not enough lenders to lend us the money, we just created it. So that's what's happening. Your dollar doesn't go as far because federal policy, whether it's spending by Congress or Federal Reserve policy that's enabled it, have destroyed the value of your dollars.
And how do ordinary Americans see that in their everyday lives?
Well, initially you saw it because the monetary inflation, that's the growing of the money supply. And then you see it in the asset price inflation, because when the cash is being destroyed, people with lots of marketable securities, i.e. wealthy people, take their cash and they protect it by putting it into stock markets or real estate, other commodities, and the prices get bid up for that. Things like oil or corn, wheat, soybeans, all those kinds of things, people put their cash into other commodities or something that's more liquid and isn't being destroyed. And then last, your average consumer starts seeing that, and they're excited because the house prices are going up. They might be excited because their 401k is going up, but it doesn't change current consumption. Eventually, those prices start showing up and you see consumer prices go in. So all three of those kind of inflations, monetary inflation, asset price inflation, and now consumer price inflation, are showing up and you're seeing it. And that's hurting retirees, most of all, because they're on fixed incomes. It's hurting wage earners, especially people at the lowest end of the spectrum, paycheck to paycheck folks the most. And it's hurting the wealthy people too, but it is growing the wealth gap because their marketable securities are being inflated.
So how do we reverse this? What could the government or policymakers do to tie the dollar to something of real value?
Well, the most immediate thing is turn something off. I mean, I was a manufacturing guy before I got into Congress. And in manufacturing, even if you didn't know the solution to make good parts, you would at least stop making bad parts, right? So the Federal Reserve right now is they're buying $80 billion worth of treasuries every month. They're buying $40 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities. The real estate market does not need price support right now. They're dumping $40 billion worth of fuel onto the housing market every month. And Congress, the only debate right now among Democrats, whether it's the infrastructure bill or their Build Back Better bill, it's really two parts of the Bernie Sanders agenda. The only thing they're talking about is dumping more fuel on the fire. It's a debate internally amongst Democrats as to how much more fuel. So instead of destroying the dollar further by more deficit spending that isn't even funded by lenders, then you should stop doing that. And then it's okay, how do we come up with a plan to actually pay for the spending? And revenues are going up. I mean, the narrative was, you cut taxes. Well, tax revenue's gone up. Federal revenues have increased, not decreased. The problem is spending. So we should have a real math debate about what should we spend the money on.
Yeah, and that's such an important point that you make. If you take the $4 or $5 trillion that Congress and the Democrats are proposing to spend under this Biden's plan, and all of that, or almost all of that, would have to be monetized by the Fed. So there's another $4 or $5 trillion where that money's just going to be printed by the Fed and to buy those bonds to support that. And so, how is this going to impact us internationally? What is the rest of the world going to do if we were to do this monetization of another $4 or $5 trillion in debt?
Yeah, so right now the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, and part of that is even when things are bad in America, they're usually worse elsewhere. But as our reaction to the situation becomes worse than other countries, it decreases the desire of foreign countries to hold U.S. dollar debt. And that increases the need for treasuries to be bought or created at the Federal Reserve to be debase our currency. So you're undermining the value of the dollar domestically and abroad. So people seek other things to put their money into globally as well. And if you think about that, the U.S. payment system is an important part of national security. And when you undermine that, you're undermining U.S. national security, not just the standard of living here in America.
Representative Davidson, I find this topic fascinating. Thank you so much for being here today and talking about this important issue.
Yeah, it's a real joy, incredibly important, and thanks for covering it.